Stop, Friendly Fire. Chapter 50-51. Chapter 50. The Battle Against Sigald. So is there anyone here who can tell me what happened in detail? The battle was over. While the Pauls were collecting the loot, Shin Woo gathered the commanders in one spot and held a discussion. He may be able to gain some info from the anti-skull's bones, but it wouldn't be the same as hearing it from those who actually fought against Sigald himself. Excuse me, huh? Sure. Shin Woo looked at Shino Rendu, who had carefully raised his hand, and smiled bitterly. His gaze wasn't directed at him, but at Sarah, who was a bit behind Shin Woo. Shino's hands shook and his gaze wavered. He resembled a drug abuser, so it was kind of frightening. Could I please talk with her a little bit? Shino Rendu, it's been a while. I see you were following Shin Woo all this time. Why yeah, that means, now that he thought about it, Shino Rendu one-sidedly loved Sarah in the past. He'd forgotten all about it because it hadn't mattered. He never imagined that they'd both become undead and meet each other again. The others seemingly noticed the peculiar mood and tilted their heads, whereas Sarah just shrugged her shoulders. Sarah, no, Redidane, why are you? Everyone who's died has their own story to tell. In any case, I died. I came to an understanding with Shin Woo and formed a contract with him. Right now, I'm working alongside him. That's all. Shin Woo had disclosed his identity as a hero to the Pauls some time ago. Shino Rendu knew this as well. The fact that he was qualified to be a hero would only serve as a positive for the Pauls. They would never see it as a detriment. Shino Rendu was the same. It didn't matter that Shin Woo was once his junior. Then, we'll be able to fight together from now on. Yes, so long as you don't betray Shin Woo. Of course, I'm so happy that I could meet you again. Shino Rendu, I'd rather you not give me any unwanted attention. Shin Woo heard and instinctively turned around. Some really sad stuff would be happening now. He decided not to listen to this. Yeah, after all, he had so much more to do. So, those who fought against Sigald. That's right, Alada, Titan. No matter how many times he said it, they refused to believe that he wasn't a Titan. Alada took one knee before Shin Woo. Shin Woo had healed her right after the battle, so her body and armor were fully repaired. However, she, as well as all those who'd fought and lost against Sigald, all sported sour expressions. I discovered him because I was at the vanguard. His appearance was sudden and intense. How did he appear? He probably wasn't hiding here before. Did you sense space element mana? You should remember that mana that covered the giant's domain. No, it wasn't. It was completely different. It was a shadow. A fire's shadow. What? Please excuse my rudeness, but may I touch you, Titan? Of course. Once he consented, Alada carefully extended her pinky finger. Shin Woo gripped her pinky and closed his eyes. The two were linked together through the darkness element, and Alada's memories were directly transmitted to Shin Woo. Now, Shin Woo understand what she meant by a fire's shadow. One of them suddenly burned themselves, creating this flame, and a shadow formed from within it. Fire's shadow is indeed an apt description of it. Sigald showed up with this. He immediately killed a level 7 giant who attempted to stop him. That was only the beginning. He then cajoled Alada, Arogan, and the Pauls with those flames. And then, he faded into the darkness and disappeared. He had a rough idea as to what had happened through Alada's memories. However, he didn't have enough information to be absolutely sure yet. If it were as she said, then, his face stiffened and he said, Alada, have you collected the bones of the burned anti-skull soldier? No, there were probably some other troops with the same mission as him. Bring me the office's bones first. Understood. Fortunately, they were able to gather the burned anti-skull soldier's bone. Shin Woo immediately absorbed it, and clearly heard Sigald's instructions. Call me if something unexpected happens. You sacrifice yourself to the flame and create a fire's shadow. And it is through this shadow that I can come over to you. That is our link. Shin Woo was briefly silent. He realized what Sigald meant, as well as how he was temporarily summoned. Man, I can't put up with this any longer. Shin Woo, no, not yet. Let's look through a few more. Bone reinforcement. He was already sure of it, but he absorbed the other office's bones regardless just in case he was misunderstanding something. However, Sigald had given the other officers the same instructions. He couldn't find a single artifact on their bodies, so he sighed and accepted the truth. The bastard didn't use spatial magic or a unique artifact. It was more of an intuitive and logical power. It was none other than an innate element. A power that differed from annihilation flame at that. This asshole had 2 innate elements. Man, he really fooled me. So he was taking it easy during our fight, huh? He's really starting to resemble me more and more. Really, what part of that surprised you? Say it. He wasn't one to talk. After all, he possessed 3 innate elements. However, Shin Woo was really frustrated. All of Shin Woo's innate elements focused on cause and effect, whether it be erasing it, stealing it, or reversing it. Yet, Sigald's innate elements were completely different. But because his innate elements were so heavily specialized, he could make better use of his wildcard skill, which manipulated cause and effect. Even so, he was still jealous of Sigald. He has 2 innate elements? To think there was someone else like you. Was Sigald a businessman from Earth too? If he was, then I'd be able to talk to him. Shin Woo smiled weakly at Jin's joke and went through the anti-skull's memories once more. What name would fit for that innate element? Well, he called it a fire's shadow before, so fire shadow should work. What a confusing name. Now that he thought about it, everyone he fought lately possessed a fusion element of darkness and something else. The undead emperor definitely had something like that, and if that's the case, then it was definitely a sign of power inflation in the second act. Jin still looked curious, so Shin Woo gave her a brief explanation. Jin, you know that darkness has the power to form connections, right? Oh, can Sigald use the darkness element too? Sarah, who he's blood related to, was able to use the darkness element once she became undead. So, it's not unusual that he can use the darkness element. On the contrary, he's a genius for being able to fuse the fire and light elements together, so it would be strange if he couldn't handle the darkness element. Of course, his darkness was much weaker than Shin Woo's. However, it was different if the darkness element was fused with another element. Fire shadow. His subordinate would sacrifice themselves, creating a shadow from the resulting flame, which would link him and his subordinate together. The fire shadow element was at the very peak of transportation abilities and was also a trick. With the addition of his stealth ability, annihilation flame, as well as his combat abilities. Shin Woo couldn't help but laugh. When I fought him, I did my best, but he was holding back the entire time. Of course, Shin Woo could use the fire element at the high rank level and had mastered the darkness element. If Sigald had actually used his fire shadow ability in front of Shin Woo, then the victor would have been decided in an instant. Shin Woo would have won right then and there. But Sigald shouldn't have known that. In other words, he had been holding back. That really pissed him off. However, things would be different now. Shin Woo thought that he'd miscalculated, but after learning about all the circumstances, he realized that Sigald had actually miscalculated. If he really wanted to hide his fire shadow ability, then he should have hidden it until the very end, regardless of how many of his subordinates he had to sacrifice. However, he had given his subordinates an option of summoning him with fire shadow, and as a result, Shin Woo had learned about the ability. He travels through the fire shadow. The moment he uses that ability against me, he could make it so that Sigald couldn't escape the shadow, or he could make it so that Sigald would burn eternally. Indeed, he'd finally satisfied all the conditions of wild card. Shin Woo tightened his fist and then Jin asked, "But why did he appear and then disappear all of a sudden, Shin Woo? It would have been the perfect crime if he killed all of your troops and then left before you arrived. It's obvious if you think about it a little, Jin. I don't like that about you. Take it down a level." Shin Woo felt that he might have gone a bit strange, as he felt that Jin's sulking voice was cute. He grinned and said, "There are 4 anti-skull bases." "Ah, I see. Sigald showed up at the other bases too." Bingo. Shin Woo had originally split up his troops without much thought. At the time, he thought that destroying all the bases would be tougher on Sigald, but he hadn't expected that it would result in this. Sigald must have thought when he was called at different locations simultaneously, "Should I stay, or should I move on to the next one?" But think about it, there were a ton of Pauls here, and even if he did his best, he wouldn't be able to save a lot of his troops. He judged that it was better to save another base than to stay here, which was a lost cause. And it did indeed turn out that way. Aside from the level 8 and 2 level 7s, the other 3 bases were attacked by 3 groups of 100 level 6 vampires. If not for Sigald, then they would have been able to take over the other anti-skull bases. But now that Sigald was coming, the Magic Emperor will be pissed. He lost track of Sigald on the surface and would lose the generals he sent underground. Now that he knows how dangerous Sigald is, he won't be able to give up. He has no choice but to come out even stronger. Yeah, this wasn't even your intention, but it turned out to be beneficial for you, Shin Woo. Hyo, did you plan all this out, Shin Woo? Of course I did, I'm always a step ahead. He was lying, of course. If he knew that Sigald was going to come out like this, then he would have accompanied the Pauls here. But he would lie as much as necessary to shock Jin. But now that it's come to this, Lee Shin Woo's was busy thinking, even while joking around with Jin. If the surface got more involved than he'd first planned, then there would be a higher risk. Above all, he would have to push forward the date of the final battle. Sup. I guess it can't be helped. I just have to do everything I can. Lee Shin Woo couldn't do anything about it. The only thing he could do was create the ideal stage with the conditions he was given. He flashed Jin a smile, who was looking at him astonished and was formulating a plan in his head. Sigald d. That bastard tricked me. The Emperor seemed pissed. It was only natural. After all of the vampires he'd dispatched had been killed, including the level 8 steel armor general. Even Lee Shin Woo hadn't thought that the level 8 general would be killed so easily. Once he'd finished cleaning up, he led his Pauls in a quick retreat. Sigald had accepted his subordinates' summons at each base, and the vampires were unable to withstand his assault and died. I apologize, Your Majesty. If I hadn't divided our forces, then. There was some good news though. Through his and the vampires' attacks on their bases, Anti-Skull's forces had been cut down by a good 1/3. However, that wouldn't be enough to cause the Emperor's anger to abate. Raise your head, Urema. That won't solve anything. We have to kill him. But Your Majesty, Lee Shin Woo trailed off. The Emperor should already know that entrusting the Metal God General alone with eliminating Sigald, who could suddenly appear and disappear anytime he wanted and had even killed a level 8 vampire, was too much to ask for. I've completely destroyed all of his forces on the surface, so he won't be able to return. He won't be able to fool the Golem network anymore either. So Urema, I need to trouble you for just a little while longer. Of course, I am ready to give my life for you, Your Majesty. No, I'm sorry for giving you such a difficult task. But my friend, I won't let you die in vain. I'll send you as many reinforcements as I can. Ultimately, the cowardly Emperor chose the second best plan instead of the very best. The Emperor was under the assumption that Urema had no choice but to obey him, as he held his strings, his physical body. But to the current Urema, or Lee Shin Woo, it was the best possible outcome. I'll send all the forces I have available. So remember, you have to stop him. Don't let those filthy undead covet the surface. Understand? Understood. I promise to do as you ask. The line went dead. Lee Shin Woo briefly pondered and soon extended his hand towards the communication device. Then, the device made a crunching noise, turned to bone, and was absorbed by Lee Shin Woo. Magic has increased by 10. Through your mastery of the darkness element, you were able to trace this darkness back to its source. The coordinates have been added to the Heaven Door's key. From here on out, he wouldn't communicate with the Emperor anymore. He was probably sending all of his forces underground, aside from a small handful that he needed to protect himself. Since he was sending such a large force, there was no need to contact him anymore. I had no choice but to use my own darkness to dispose of the communication device. Otherwise, he would have known that it was tampered with. And, would it really work out? Lee Shin Woo had thought, but he had achieved his secondary objective. Trace the darkness back to its source and figure out where the Emperor was hiding. When would the Emperor figure this out? He would probably never figure it out. By that time, he'd have a sword slicing through his throat. Now, let's make a dummy and put it over here. Darkness radiated from his fingertips and formed into a solid shape. This dummy device was created so that the Emperor wouldn't realize that the original communication device was damaged, and would act as a receiver that only received his signals. Thanks, Urema Steelworker. You really did a lot for me. Li Shin Woo put away the device, returned to his original form, and muttered in satisfaction. Then, he left the room and locked it. He saw Kracia right in front of him. It might have been just him, but she seemed pretty impatient. Let's hurry up and improve the Titan. I have to go once the surface sends reinforcements. Can we really do it before then? We have to. Sigald's dangerous, the capital even more so. The more unknowns there are, the more you have to prepare, Shin Woo. You're right, but, honestly, Li Shin Woo's side was a force to be reckoned with. He had 5 level 8s, which included himself, Jin, Kai Paul, Sarah, and Dana, along with several level 7 giants, which had exceptionally high physical stats. He couldn't even count how many he had with both hands. Yi Jin, she had recently hit level 7, wore level 9 artifact and was accompanied by the level 8 spirit, Zenon, so she was probably more powerful than most level 8s as well. Even though both sides have a level 9 boss, I think I can take them on with these forces. Despite that, Li Shin Woo was still busy setting up the board. Why else would he be doing this? Because something unexpected could pop up out of nowhere. After all, Li Shin Woo himself was an unknown that hadn't existed just 2 years ago. The Underground Empire had changed this much with his sudden appearance, so it would be foolish to assume that his enemies were exactly the same. Sigald was a clear example of this. Where's Sigald going? He's going around the bases and collecting all the surviving troops. He's almost done. When he's finished, he'll probably go straight to the capital. As I thought, Li Shin Woo thought as much. When Sigald had come for Byron, he thought that the battle was coming to an end. The Emperor probably thought the same. Several of the 12 generals had been killed and the capital had sustained a blast of light from the cannon. Shin Woo. Kracia stared right at Li Shin Woo, who was organizing his thoughts. He felt like he knew what she was going to say. I'm going too. You can't. Jin's going. She's level 8. No, I just can't go without her. If Jin were here, she would have smiled in delight, despite knowing that that wasn't what he meant. Of course, Jin wasn't the one in front of him, but Kracia. She was puffing up her cheeks. Kracia was being quite expressive for such a cold magician. But Sarah's going too. She keeps insisting that she sees her older brother's death. And she's level 8 too. Originally, he hadn't intended on bringing Sarah along, but due to her insistence, as well as seeing her authority as a banshee in the previous battle, he caved. Her abilities were really compatible with his own. He would be able to maximize his abilities as a joker with her around. I can help too. Yeah, you would help. But the problem's that you'll be in danger. But you're the one in the most danger. I'll be fine. Even if I'm killed, I won't die. Don't you worry, I can get out of any situation. He didn't lie unnecessarily. In the end, Kracia sighed at Li Shin Woo's boasting and said, Shin Woo, you're a precious sample, so you're not allowed to die. I'm glad that you're concerned about me, but could you do something about that title? He smiled bitterly and softly patted her shoulder. In order to take her mind off of it, he needed to. Let's improve the Titan. I'm trusting you. Since I'm taking time out of my practice time with Jin, we have to get somewhere with it. Leave it to me. I'll do it no matter what. From that moment on, the two focused on nothing else but fusing the Titan core and the demon heart together. No, it wouldn't be a wrongful assumption to say that they were trying to use the demon heart to fundamentally strengthen the Titan core. The Titan was a weapon that amplified Li Shin Woo's abilities, and in order to turn it into a shield that could protect him, he overlapped all of his abilities and melted them into the darkness. But, in order to transform it into an absolute weapon that turned lies into truth. Shin Woo? It might work if we limit its potential. The Titan was currently infused with the dark flame element, divided, that made the fire and darkness elements. And the demon heart's overlapping ability definitely originated from the darkness element. When he first planned out the Titan's improvements, he thought he could use the demon heart as a medium to fuse all his elements together, but that was impossible from the very beginning. Li Shin Woo himself didn't wield that many elements together at one time. But what would happen if I used darkness as the foundation and then combined all my flames with it? Won't that work? In other words, you're going to add your shining flame too? But that's the light element. The reinforcement will become unstable unless you can grasp the fusion element between light and darkness. The reason why elements can't be overlapped is because conflicting elements can't mix very well. Li Shin Woo thought long and hard. It was clear that imparting his flames into the Titan during the creation stage was impossible. Instead, focusing entirely on the fire aspect and maximizing that would increase the Titan's strength much more. Then, Kracia spoke, as if she'd come up with an idea. Shin Woo, how's this? What is it? Kracia was struck with inspiration. She drew a large X through their current blueprint and drew the Titan core and the Demon Heart's mana circuits such that even Shin Woo was able to understand it. Then, she began explaining. Changing the Demon Heart's properties during the planning phase is impossible. Then what about making two different types of circuits? As expected, depending on the way the Demon Heart was used, the Titan's functionality would change. If that's the case, then Shin Woo didn't need to think about it. Kracia saw him nod his head, and she herself nodded and said, "First, make a simple circuit that goes straight from the Demon Heart to the Titan core. If you activate this line, then the Demon Heart's defensive capabilities should transfer to the Titan. Let's call this normal mode." No matter how he looked at it, she really was a genius. He honestly didn't really understand what she was talking about, so he felt like he had become like Jin and just nodded his head. Kracia then created an even more complicated magic formula atop the plan and said, "If normal mode is when the Titan is connected with the Demon Heart, thus reinforcing it, then the next mode is a bit different. You instead connect with the Demon Heart and then that connects with the Titan core. Let's call this showdown mode. We're going to make these two lines and make it so that you can switch between them." While the former idea, where the Titan gains the Demon Heart's defensive and magical abilities, was a simple concept, this improvement was always possible. The latter idea was so complex that it could only be derived from Kracia's genius. Since this method would first involve Shin Woo passing his power through the Demon Heart, thus reinforcing it, and then he would activate the Titan core after. In other words, this mode will allow me to directly control the Demon Heart. You're making it so that I can control the Demon Heart myself and preserve its overlapping ability. And that power will spread throughout the Titan. Yep. Then you just need to use the Demon Heart's overlapping ability to overlap your Dark Flame and Shining Flame. Then, you apply it to the Titan. Because it's a lot more stressful on you, the Titan's safety and durability will decrease, but this is the only way. Sorry to say, but it's too chuny. And ultimately, overlapping the Dark Flame and Shining Flame falls to me. Well, I was the one who suggested it, so it's only right that I take on the burden. It was quite sudden, but fusing together two conflicting powers was totally like combining items. Wouldn't it be possible? But there's also something else I've thought of. If you can use the overlapping power properly, then this should be possible too. But Kracia didn't stop there. Maybe she'd already thought of the theory and application. She drew the structure of the core, as well as the inside of the Titan itself, causing Shin Woo to sport a doubtful expression. Hey, this is, in conclusion, controlling the Dark Flame and Shining Flame so that they can be overlapped by the Demon Heart. There's a way to control them. I don't know what lays beyond that, but Shin Woo looked at the completed interior design of the Titan and shuddered. With this, he could definitely. That might be possible. That night, they finished upgrading the Titan. The very next day, the troops from the surface arrived in the underground empire. Today was the day that Shin Woo would meet with the second group of vampires and head towards the capital. He left the metal army base and arrived at the secret rendezvous location, but was at a bit of a loss. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lord Arama Steelworker, the Empire's guardian. It's an honor to meet a steelworker." For the Emperor, there was, of course, no problem with the quality of the army. 2 more level 8 generals had come, and they were definitely more powerful than the steel armor general. That wasn't all. Though they weren't part of the 12 generals, there were still 5 level 7 elites amongst the 500 level 6 elite vampires. The Emperor truly did send his best. However, it's been a while, Arama Steelworker. It really has been a long time. An unknown woman acted like she knew him, with a really displeased expression at that. Beauty was the most apt term for this charming middle-aged woman, but it really didn't matter to Shin Woo either way. LV8 Light General Sorora von Lelaine, Elder Vampire. She must have known Arama Steelworker for a long time. Shin Woo had figured out her name but didn't know anything else about her, so he contacted Kai Paul and tried to get some info on her. However, he wasn't able to get much on her. What he did know was that she really wasn't a relative. You went so far as to become a golem and come down here, yet you weren't able to do anything right, let alone fulfill your mission, ultimately forcing me to come down to this wretched place. Ha ha ha. Forgive her, Urema. Madame Lelaine is just happy to see you. She knows more than anyone how much you've sacrificed and what you've achieved here. Isn't that right, madam? How ridiculous. No matter how much you've achieved in the past, it doesn't matter if you fail now. I'm so ashamed that I was once at the same level as this man. The other level 8 general was a middle-aged man, called the Sun Spear General Judica von Belladons. He was also an elder vampire as well. And he likewise acted like he knew Urema, but Shin Woo didn't know who he was either. They weren't suspicious of him, as he maintained Urema's basic qualities, but... oh my, it seems to me that Urema has gotten just as strong as we have. Isn't that right, Urema? HMPH. There's nothing for me to say. You'll see soon enough. Haha, you're still the same. To think that he'd run into this kind of problem. He was briefly puzzled, but soon realized that the Emperor had sent generals with the same standing as Urema himself. They had served the Emperor just as long as he had, and they had achieved just as much. Shin Woo realized this and decided to throw out a feeler. If you all came down here, then what about the surface? Don't worry about the Emperor's safety, Urema. One of the 4 heavenly commanders is still by His Majesty's side. Bingo. As expected, these guys were part of the 4 heavenly commanders. He'd learned that the surface's 4 strongest generals were also called the 4 heavenly commanders when he was on the surface. He hadn't known who they were, but now he knew who 3 of the 4 were. Including Urema, that is, so that's how it was. Urema was part of the 4 heavenly commanders on both the surface and underground. Even though he had died the simplest death of the 4 heavenly commanders. He inwardly laughed, and the light general, Sorora von Lelaine, furrowed her brow once more and said, Kuren von Begner, I don't like his attitude. He was the first to accept becoming a vampire, and he acts like he'd lick His Majesty's feet if he just asked him. Those words can be construed as disloyalty towards the Emperor, madam. I just want to maintain peace in the Empire. His Majesty knows how I feel. Moreover, I ended up becoming a wretched vampire too. So don't nitpick, got it? Who? As always, you're quite fussy, madam. And you're always noisy and annoying. Shin Woo just watched the fussy woman and the chatty man. If he were being honest, then he felt like they were good people. But they were going to die anyway, so it didn't really matter. But it concerned him that they knew Urema Steelworker from a long while back. If his identity was exposed halfway through the operation, then he would have to kill these precious soldiers right then and there. If he knew this would happen, then he would have absorbed Urema Steelworker directly, though he'd feel a bit sorry for Kai Paul. No, there's no point in regretting it now. I can do it. I can act like him with just the info I have on hand. Only then can I call myself a true joker. When he was still in South Korea, there was a voice phishing scam that worked by just knowing one's name and telephone number. It was the most simple, but also most advanced level of trickery that anticipated one's responses and behavior while leading them to give you what you wanted. But Shin Woo already knew Urema Steelworker's personality, and could perfectly replicate his appearance and voice. There was no way he couldn't do what so many other swindlers could. Then, the light general approached him, slapped his back, and said curtly, You're just as slow as ever, Urema. How long do you plan to dawdle around? If you're ready, then wipe that stupid expression off your face and give the order to march. It was really difficult to measure how close they were. But if they were close enough that she told him to hurry up and give the order, then despite the hostility that she showed him earlier, she didn't seem to really hate Urema Steelworker. She was essentially acknowledging that he had the right to command them, including her. Shin Woo snorted and said, I'm glad you have my back. I hope you stay like that when you fight against Sigald. Are you looking down on me? I won't be defeated like you. You won't get a chance to do anything, Urema. Just think about a way to safely get into the capital. His Majesty told me that you knew where Sigald was. Do you have a surefire method of finding him? Or do you have an artifact that can find him? It's nothing so amazing. My subordinates scoured the underground for dozens of years, so I was able to find his bases. In exchange, I lost some of my precious subordinates, but he shouldn't be able to hide within the capital, especially if his goal is Jizahanu. As expected, the Sun Spear General shrugged his shoulders and narrowed his eyes. He was doubting him. No, a person who was about to joke around often looked like this. You stuck by Jizehanu's side for dozens of years, so you should know the capital like the back of your hand. Don't make it sound like I feel anything for Jizehanu. All I feel for him is hatred. You'll make me feel nauseous. Haha, I've never doubted your loyalty, Urema. Anyway, be more friendly, like old times. You and I? Don't make me laugh. Kek, you've gotten even more rigid. Seems like Madame Lelaine is going to have a hard time. I told you to shut up. Good, it worked. They weren't suspicious of him at all. It felt like they were tested him whenever he spoke, but he got a feel for it with his comment. Shin Woo smiled and took a step forward. Are you all ready? Yes, sir. Good. The vampires were frozen stiff, as they couldn't interfere with the 4 heavenly commanders' conversation, and the several hundred level 6 golems Shin Woo had prepared were likewise all lined up. Shin Woo spared a glance at one of the golems, coughed, and then turned his gaze towards the rest of the troops. Listen up, that rebel, Sigald von Rededane, dares to challenge the Emperor, who rules over both the surface and underground and had the gall to confuse His Majesty with his petty flames. Right now, he's headed towards the underground capital. He's going to use that poor ability of his to brainwash Jizehanu and attempt to tread upon the surface. Not only has he troubled our great Emperor, but that dirty skeleton is trying to hurt our innocent citizens. We can't let that happen. No, we can't. We have to kill him. The vampires were enthralled and responded strongly. Shin Woo's overwhelming pressure caused them all to unite as one. Even the Light General, whose hand was shaking the Sun Spear General's head, was surprised and widened her eyes. As one of the Empire's 4 heavenly commanders, I, Urema Steelworker, order you. We're going to the capital. We'll destroy anything in our way and present Sigald's head to His Majesty. It's going to be dangerous. Those fools will try to stop us. The Lich may show up too. Even Jizehanu may come, but even so, can we afford to back down? No, the Emperor's forces knows no retreat. That's right, I'll tell you once more, so listen up. We're going to the capital. We're going to kill Sigald von Rededane. I'll give you all this chance. Anyone who catches him, hurts him, or kills him, you'll be rewarded based on your contribution. Let's take back the Empire's eternal peace with our own 2 hands. His Majesty will certainly recognize those who have died and those who have survived. That's right, it'll definitely go as you say, Lord Urema. The vampires had instantaneously become one and cried out. Though some of them were indeed loyal to the Emperor, Shin Woo had instantly amplified their emotions through his speech. Even if there were some who may have opposed the Magic Emperor, with his LV9 high-rank command skill, which was amplified by his acting and instigate skills, his speech would cause them to yell, I. Even the Light General's heart throbbed, despite her not swearing fealty to the Emperor. Though in her case, it wasn't because of the contents of his speech. All right, then, march. We won't turn back until we kill Sigald. The soldiers were excited. The Light General and the Sun Spear General got a hold of themselves but had raised an arm alongside the soldiers. They soon realized this and lowered their arms in embarrassment. I'm surprised, Urema. When did you get so good at talking? It was as if you were a different person. I just realized that you need several ways to command. HMPH. You're still as dull as ever, but at least it seems like you haven't regressed. The Sun Spear General was shocked, but the Light General was still as sarcastic as ever. Shin Woo didn't say anything and turned his gaze to the front. He was looking at the golem that he'd looked at before, and he spoke to that golem telepathically. It was an amazing speech. I see that that's how you've been fooling us till now. If you're that amazed by my abilities, then just compliment me. Shin Woo telepathically spoke to that golem, no, that empty shell that Sarah was in, and took a step forward. He had taken another step forward towards the fated battle. Don't you want to know what's happened on the surface during the time you were away? The Light General, Sorora von Lelaine. She seemed to have some strange feelings towards Urema Steelworker. No, it was probably an ongoing thing. That's the conclusion that Shin Woo came to. I'm happy so long as His Majesty is safe. You still say the stupidest of things. I told you before, without you, the Empire and the Emperor won't exist. Watch your mouth. At first, Shin Woo had thought that there was some sort of bad blood between them. When he considered her and Urema's personalities, He assumed that they had disagreed in politics or values. However, don't you want to know what's happened to your family ever since you stuffed yourself and your relatives into golems and went underground? His Majesty told me that he'd bestow upon me the highest position in the Empire, second only to his own. I trust that my family's still going strong. What unshakable loyalty. All the other members of the 4 heavenly generals got married and had kids, but you're the only one stuck in that metal shell of yours. Don't you feel miserable? Not at all. I got married too, though my husband died already. Shin Woo was starting to catch on. He'd thought, there's no way she likes this half-wit, does she? But after listening to her, that suspicion became absolute certainty. It seems like these two had feelings for each other when they were young. If not, then this beautiful lady had a one-sided love for Arema. Why now? What a pain in the ass. He already had enough trouble as it was dealing with the women in his life, but now he had to deal with a woman who still loved an already dead man. It felt really awkward, since there was a higher chance that she would figure out that he was a fake. But she didn't know that Arema was actually dead, and with a complicated expression, she grumpily quarreled with him. Don't you have anything to say? Should I? Am I supposed to ask about your husband? Has your heart become metal as well? She responded despondently. Shin Woo did his best to ignore her while Jin, who he had been riding on before, snickered. Jin was also disguised as a golem right now. Her body was originally covered in steel, so it was easy to disguise her. You usually talk a lot more. What's wrong? Is it too much for even you to accept a middle-aged woman? Knock it off, Jin. The more I talk to her, the more awkward it'll get. I guess I just have to hope that we arrive at the capital quickly. That didn't work as he wished either. He'd created these golems as consumables. He adjusted them so that their core's energy would be depleted, in return allowing them to move faster and stronger than normal. Thus, they would be able to keep up, no matter how fast the surface's troops marched. But the issue lay with the vampires. Kook, that's an artifact created through powerful light mana. Those Redidane bastards, did they predict the Emperor's course of action and prepare this in advance? You all know that Sigald can wield light, right? If this is enough to stop you, then you'll never be able to defeat him. I know, we prepared a countermeasure, Shin Woo said sarcastically, unable to hide his disappointment at how pathetic they were. But then, the Light General replied temperamentally. As her name implied, it seemed like she could originally wield light. And apparently, after becoming an elder vampire, she would hurt herself whenever she used the light element. Meaning that not everyone could be like Sarah or Sigald, and balance both light and darkness together. In other words, her becoming an elder vampire had effectively sealed her greatest ability. She was a complete idiot. So what exactly is that countermeasure of yours? Did His Majesty perhaps? Exactly. The Emperor created an artifact that can convert the undead curse into a darkness element barrier. It's not very strong, but it's effective over a wide area and makes one unable to use the light element. How is it, Arema? This is an artifact that was created by His Majesty himself. The Sun Spear General passed him a metal disc and Shin Woo observed it. He obviously didn't ossify it. Not only was it not his, but the Emperor was a higher level than him. Above all, Shin Woo's bone reinforcement had advanced recently, allowing him some control over it. As expected, it's growing. I don't need to feel restless. He assumed that his recent advances in bone reinforcement were due to his training in the manatization skill. As he studied this skill, which allowed him to transform his body into mana, he became more capable of controlling mana and matter. His manatization skill had gotten to level 5 just recently, and this was the fruit of that effort. He was sure that the day he mastered the manatization skill would also be the day that bone reinforcement and rule of bone fundamentally changed. But more importantly, he put that past him and observed the disc. It reminded him of the pieces of metal within those liquid hand warmers he'd used when he was a student. Dark Red Solar Eclipse +5. LV7. Durability. 5/5. Options. Once activated, the object breaks into pieces and the magic contained within is released, creating a widespread barrier of darkness. A vampire's abilities are doubled within this area, and the power of light is weakened. But this artifact cannot block light that far exceeds its level. This is a consumable artifact that contains His Majesty's power. It's truly amazing. However, don't worry, we have a few more like this. His Majesty wants this operation to succeed no matter what. Doesn't it? 3 of the 4 heavenly commanders being here prove that? That wasn't like me. I might have been scared of being defeated by him once before. Laugh if you want to. No, I'm not going to laugh at you, Urema. The Sun Spear General sported a serious expression and patted his shoulder. On the contrary, you did well to survive against him. Not only did the Emperor realize how dangerous he was, but you also went as far as to sacrifice your subordinates to find out where his bases were and what his goals are. There's no one that can deny your accomplishments because of that. You're still the Empire's greatest shield. Keep your head up high. You're still as silver-tongued as always. Shin Woo replied and smiled bitterly. Then, the Sun Spear General smiled in satisfaction. The Light General watched their interaction and gritted her teeth, as if in disapproval. What about the other vampires? They were just moving their feet in silence, not daring to interfere in the 4 heavenly commanders' conversation. It's gotten quiet all of a sudden. It was the 2nd day of their march. Once it became daytime, the vampires set up camp and took a break. While vampires looked so human-like that they could be called demi-undead, they still possessed a critical weakness. They couldn't operate during the daytime. For undead, they're quite a strange species. Seems like they can reproduce too. It also seems like the undead traits are minimized, like the stubbornness and the impulsiveness. This must have been the reason why the Emperor decided to become a vampire, despite the undead being an imperfect existence. But did vampires overcome all the disadvantages that came with being an undead? If asked, Shin Woo would shake his head. Shin Woo could tell, as one who had overcome all of these disadvantages. The vampires possessed an imperfection, a more pronounced flaw than the other undead species. Their weakness during the day was one such flaw. They're not even in direct sunlight, but they're half asleep already. Their resistance to sunlight is weak, their senses weaken, and their mana becomes inactive. No, is this because the artificial sun is just that strong? Shin Woo observed the vampires and wondered how he should fight the Emperor when the time came. But then, he suddenly felt a presence from behind him and turned around. There stood the Light General, Sorora von Lilane. She seemed completely different from before, when she agonized under the light of the artificial sun. I know you're surprised, but don't be so loud. Just listen to me. She was likely talking to him telepathically through darkness element mana. He didn't really know what was going on, but Shin Woo nodded his head. Then, she sighed as if she were relieved and then continued. The others are affected by a vampire's natural weakness to sunlight, but I'm different. I could originally wield the light element, so I can move around during the day without any problems. Though I suppose you could say that I bear a penalty just as severe myself. He thought she was a dumbass for becoming a vampire when she could originally wield the light element, but that wasn't entirely the case. Shin Woo nodded his head in acknowledgement, and then she confessed something even more shocking. That's not all. I was able to sever my connection with the Emperor. You told me that your own connection with the Emperor was severed when you were encased in a golem's body. Isn't that right? How surprising. She was transformed into a vampire through the Emperor's power, yet she was able to sever the connection with him? What the hell was she going on about? That's what light is all about. The Emperor's strong, but he cannot use the light element. That's why he had no choice but to make use of me, and that's how I was able to grasp the Emperor's weakness. You, listen to everything I have to say and then make your decision. Since I brought enough information to make even your loyalty waver. If I hadn't, then I wouldn't have humiliated myself and become a vampire and then come all the way down here to see you. Urema would be fuming right now, Shin Woo thought, but she continued sharply, so he kept his mouth shut for now. Your body. Do you even know what happened to your body? You don't, do you? Let me tell you, it's gone. It's gone without a trace. The Emperor just realized this, but he did everything he could to keep you from finding out. He hasn't kept a single one of his promises to you, he's just using you. Now you don't have a body to return to? How did she hide these feelings from him all this time? He wondered, as her voice was so intense, even through telepathy. Shin Woo saw tears flow down her cheeks and didn't say anything. Urema, you're pretty good, he thought frivolously. When she'd asked if he had any interest in what happened on the surface, she probably wanted to tell him about this. I can give you anything you want as proof. I didn't come here to kill Redidane. I came here to convince you. The Emperor's losing power. If you want to take your revenge, then now's the time. If you want to keep listening, then nod your head. If not, then you can kill me or let me go. Do as you wish, she finished, and then opened her arms wide and stood there defenselessly. But her eyes were staring straight at him. To think that not only did she have feelings for Arema, but she would bring such a bombshell to light. Shin Woo tried desperately to keep his lips from curling upwards. Does he take the safe choice and kill her here, or does he risk exposing his identity? There was only one choice he could take. It looks like a storm's coming. The Joker nodded his head without hesitation. The woman in front of him just smiled sadly. 3 days later, the group safely arrived at the capital. They had passed right through the level 4 danger zone, Byron, and then headed straight for the capital. Though he wasn't here with the other heroes, he was still deeply moved. Is this, really? Are you surprised? Obviously. The Light General was astonished. The outer fortress was completely gone, exposing the inner city within. It's the capital, yet there are absolutely no defenses. How are we supposed to take this? Is this really the capital? Is the capital actually inside a hidden subspace? Calm down. It wasn't originally like this. The capital's defensive facilities were all destroyed in a recent battle. What kind of battle would have destroyed all of its defensive facilities? The Sun Spear General had been smiling ever since they'd been reunited, but even he was stuck between shock and confusion and didn't know what to do. But it's not like he could say, I'm actually the heaven-defying general and the hero Shin Woo. I aimed the cannon the Lich made at the capital and shot light at it, so Shin Woo just remained quiet. The Sun Spear General seemed to come to his own conclusion and patted him on the shoulder. Now I get how much you went through. HMPH. This, HMPH, was Arema Steelworkers' equivalent to, thanks for understanding, my friend. It seemed to get through to them, as the Sun Spear General laughed and the Light General just sighed. Shin Woo was suddenly fearful of how effective his acting was. I'm sure you already know, but I'll say it again. It's impossible to move covertly within the capital. We need to move as quickly as possible and achieve our goal. Once we do, we have to get out of here as quickly as possible. We know already. That's why we've prepared so much. Shin Woo saw the Sun Spear General take out 3 more of the consumable artifact, the Dark Red Solar Eclipse, and just nodded his head. Yeah, he needed to trust them. They were the surface's 4 heavenly commanders, weren't they? Even Arema Steelworker had been one of the 4 heavenly commanders. Then, let's get going. I can't tell you exactly where Sigald is, so we should send scouts out to look for him. Yeah, you know the capital best, so I'll leave it to you. Amazing. Shin Woo picked some scouts from the vampires and golems and sent them off in various directions. Of course, Shin Woo already knew where Sigald's current location was, so scouts were unnecessary. He was just sending them to provoke the Imperial Army. They would also get in Sigald's way, as well as help adjust his timing and start the battle. Shin Woo sent his golems along the safest route, but he'd mostly dispatched them to pick up any more evil eye ore that might be laying around. He really hoped that there was at least a little bit left. Then let's get a move on. Judica, is the report system secure? Of course. Don't look down on the power of a vampire. I'm sorry, but I am looking down on it right now, Shin Woo was instinctively about to say, but desperately restrained himself from doing so and quickly moved forward. In his place, the Light General snorted, but the Sun Spear General just ignored her. Shin Woo realized something was off 30 minutes later. They marched through the inner city, which had been turned to ash by the cannon, and got closer and closer to the capital. While doing so, the mana radar picked up something. It was neither Sigald nor the Archmage. It was a mana signature that Shin Woo wasn't familiar with. But then, why was the mana radar picking it up? That reason was extremely simple. Currently, the mana radar didn't just detect the mana that he was familiar with, but also any mana level 8 or over as well. And at this very moment, there was a presence headed right for them. There were also 3 level 7 elites around them, as well as hundreds of level 6 soldiers as well. Arema, how many level 8 undead remained within the underground empire that he wasn't aware of? He couldn't see their face, but he knew who it was. But the issue was, why were they coming towards them right now? He looked at the Sun Spear General, who had paused and was looking at him strangely, and asked. I'll ask just in case, but you guys. No one followed you down from the surface, right? Of course not. We came straight from the palace. There's no way someone followed us. But for you to be like that, are you saying what I think you're saying? It might be tough, but we got to move as quickly as possible. I'll order some of these guys to buy us some time. Shin Woo split 50 vampires and 100 golems from his main force and sent them away. He was clearly sending them to their deaths, but the golems always followed orders, and the vampires were psychopaths that were loyal to a fault, so they left without a single complaint. The main force marched on even quicker than before. He already knew where Sigald was, so he picked the optimum route while acting appropriately. The aftermath wouldn't matter. However, another 30 minutes later, Shin Woo inwardly groaned. He knew they wouldn't last long against a level 8 opponent, but this was too much. They were taken out as soon as they met them. They weren't able to buy him any time at all. But here's where it starts. Were we able to throw off our enemies even a little? I guess it was too much to hope for. Then that means they have a way of tracking us. Their enemy was heading straight for them, which meant they had a way of tracking them in real time. He'd said it in passing, but perhaps the Archmage really did have a Moonin's eye. 1. If you could do that, then go after Sigald. Damn it, maybe the Lich is already after him. You're right. As Jin said, the Mana radar had picked up 2 familiar level 8 undead fighting against each other around the capital's inner fortress. It was Sigald and the Archmage, Theotaine von Seldin. However, Shin Woo had come here to prevent Sigald from meeting either the Lich or the Emperor and turn them into anti-Skull. The fact that he was dealing with the Archmage right now wasn't good news for him. What should I do? Even if I go, the Archmage will lose to Sigald. I don't have any time to waste. How about leading him to Sigald? No, that's impossible, even for me. If that's the case, then how about using the Heaven Door's key and sending him off somewhere? He couldn't just shoot the gate at someone like the Maido Zangetsuha, too. The Sun Spear General was actually the one to stop him. You're the one who knows the capital best, Urema. There's no point in us going first. I don't know who's following us, but if one of us has to stay back, then I'll stay. No, if you keep going this way, you'll eventually find Sigald. Moreover, the one who's coming this way is probably Leofield von Terriman. You can't stop him. Huh, that's great. I always wanted to fight against him. They say his spearmanship is unmatched. As a spear user myself, I want to see just who's more skilled with the spear. Why, wasn't he one of the Emperor's puppets? If that's true, then shouldn't he be jumping at the chance to catch Sigald? Even though he was acting, Shin Woo was genuinely confused and trailed off. The Sun Spear General, Judica von Belladens, spoke with a clear smile. He was being genuine for the first time since coming down here. Urema, Madame Lelaine isn't the only one who has something they regret. I, like her, regret not stopping you that day. I can't forget how I allowed my friend to sacrifice his bright future. So, let me do this much. Judica, Shin Woo believed that others acted rationally and in their best interests so that no harm would come to them. Thus, he didn't expect Judica to volunteer to stay as bait. Human emotion truly was difficult to predict. The Light General and this guy were both difficult to predict. He strived to keep his emotions from showing. This also befitted Urema's personality, and spoke calmly. Don't die, Judica, but if you do die, I'll be sure to pick up your bones, so don't worry. That was the truth. He couldn't let a single level 8 bone go to waste. I won't die, so don't worry, Urema. I'm counting on you. Since His Majesty told us to strike down Sigald without fail. His Majesty's orders are absolute. That's something you always used to say. Of course, Sigald will die by my hand. Shin Woo extended a hand, as though he were hesitating. The Sun Spear General grabbed his hand and flashed him a calm smile. He said he wouldn't die, yet his expression said otherwise. He looked like he was ready to die. Then let's meet up a little while later. Got it. Come back safely. He probably wouldn't come back, since he could tell how strong he was. Shin Woo tried his best not to show it to someone else. One might interpret it as him stopping himself from crying, and turned around. The Sun Spear General just grinned and began walking towards the direction of their pursuers. It was like a scene straight out of a movie. To think he felt that way for so many years. Indeed, it's already been so many years. What's he thinking? You're all idiots. You and him. Urema, Li Shin Woo's acting was so perfect that one might wonder whether Arema really was dead, saying, "Oh, Arema really was alive?" He spoke brusquely, but the deep emotion within them caused even Jin to tilt her head. "So, how would the light general fare?" She fixed the scarf around her neck and looked at him unkindly. "You were just acting like you were as tough as nails. You really fooled me. I have no idea what you're talking about." "Ha, even when they age, men are always idiots," she said and looked at him warmly. If Jin didn't know that the light general was directing that gaze at Arema, not Li Shin Woo, then she would be putting up a huge fuss right now. Li Shin Woo then thought, "If you keep being like this, then it'll become harder to kill you later." And thus, the vampire and the demon. The hero put the Sun Spear General's sacrifice behind them and began running towards Sigald. Chapter 51. Underground Sun. The Sun General did his job. Befitting one of the surface's heavenly commanders, he was able to hold out against the last remaining heavenly commander of the Underground Empire. Leofield likely possessed an artifact that tracked their movements, and so his subordinates attacked the Sun General along with him, rather than follow the vampire's main force. Li Shin Woo nodded his head in satisfaction, as he checked what was happening through the Mana radar. "No one else is chasing us anymore. Judika's holding them back. That man, he'll die. You don't know that, HMPH. I guess it doesn't matter. I just hope he does his job properly." He strongly agreed with her, but he feigned indifference. The light general changed topics, as she understood how he was feeling. So, she didn't really care why the Sun Spear General had done what he did. After all, he, her biggest obstacle, got rid of himself on his own. She secretly formed a barrier so that her subordinates couldn't hear her and said, "Do we really have to kill Sigald here?" "We do. I believe I already explained it to you." "Did you? I'm glad to see you haven't been idling around all these years." The previous day, Li Shin Woo had acted surprised at the revelation that Arema Steelworker's true body was gone. This was important, and conversed with the Light General. In the end, he decided to get his revenge. Despite that, he was still committed to killing Sigald, as Sigald's vengeance wasn't only aimed at the surface's emperor. He'll eventually ravage the surface. We can't drag innocent citizens into our affairs. We have to finish it here. "Ha, you still care so much for the people who have long since abandoned you, I see. This world is nothing without humans," Li Shin Woo said and was momentarily silent. He took out what he'd prepared while she was resting yesterday. It was an envelope. "This is, just in case I die. I don't need it. You'll need it. No, I want to entrust it to you. Arema." Li Shin Woo recalled writing a personal note for himself, yet a friend of his, who he thought was quite close, had revealed it to the entire school. He used that memory to help him put on a convincingly sad expression. His face became naturally tinged in betrayal and emptiness. Seeing that, Jin wondered whether or not it was okay for golems to have advanced so far. Li Shin Woo just completely ignored her consternation and continued, "I know. The best case scenario is me getting through this battle alive. But if I can't return to the surface, then I hope you can do this in my stead. I'd like you to prove that I existed. This is, you don't need to look at it now. If I die and your feelings haven't changed, then open it. There'll be people who can help you. There's someone I met on the surface. He's a hero, but he's trustworthy." The Light General couldn't formulate a coherent response and just stared at Li Shin Woo. However, Li Shin Woo was acting exactly as Arema would, putting up a front that would work on Arema's past lover. And that woman, who had loved Arema so dearly, just bit her lip and accepted it. "I won't let you die. I'll hold on to this envelope for you, but I'll never get a chance to open it." HMPH. This time his HMPH meant, "You always say something that causes my resolve to waver." At this point, Li Shin Woo's acting was so perfect that it was almost impossible to differentiate him from Arema. "Shin Woo, you'll definitely get an Oscar this year. I'm in character right now, so be quiet. You're not even denying that you're from the surface now, are you?" Fortunately, his beautiful performance, which confused himself along with everyone else, would soon come to an end. After all, he started sensing traces of the Archmage and the Annihilation Flame Sword God close by. He really brought the rest of Anti-Skull with him. I'm sure of it, he's definitely trying to end it here. Sigald was planning on bringing the Lich and the Emperor to his side no matter what. If that happened, Li Shin Woo's forces wouldn't lose, but the already complicated situation would become even more complicated. But based on how it's going, we're actually at an advantage. Originally, Li Shin Woo hadn't expected the Magic Emperor to send 2 of his heavenly commanders down. Moreover, to think he'd be able to use one of them to hold off the underground heavenly commander, Leofield von Terraman. Not only that, the Archmage wasn't staying next to the Emperor and was facing off against Sigald. Yeah, everything's perfect. I'll kill him here no matter what. Yeah, even if I have to die. I told you to stop saying that. He instinctively muttered, and the Light General nervously yelled. He was supposed to add 1 or 2 times after it, but had deliberately omitted it. She obviously didn't know the truth. This kind of thing was important. He kept saying things that foreshadowed his death, so that if he did die, they could say, it really felt like he was going to die. Kawa. The closer they got to their destination, the louder the monster's screams became. They were probably summoned by the Archmage himself. Had he been visiting the high-level dungeons for that many years? Li Shin Woo was speechless and tightened his fist. Surprisingly, his fist was covered in a blindingly bright golden mana, metal element mana. You have learned the LV1 high-rank metal element and magic has increased by 100. The gold element, or more specifically, the metal element. It was an element that could only be wielded by individuals with a metal body, and although it originated from the earth element, it was both stronger and tougher than its counterpart, almost resembling pure physical force. That's, Arama, you're finally able to wield an element on your own. And it's a never-before-seen element at that. I'm leading the way, so it's only natural that I'm the one who discovered it. You always did hide your own achievements. You really haven't changed at all. HMPH. While the element specialized in reinforcing metal, it was also possible to concentrate it and fire it off like a brute, like Arama. It satisfied both physical force and mana, and was a well-rounded element that increased one's attack and defense. And Li Shin Woo was now able to replicate that extraordinary element. When did you learn that element? You didn't even absorb Arama's bones. I actually just learned it right now. I thought it wouldn't work. I tried recreating it by basing it off the earth element, but it turns out I could do it. It just turns out you can do it. It just turns out you can do it. He tried to replicate the element, but had ended up learning it instead. Li Shin Woo didn't know this yet, but by acting as Arama's steelworker for the past few days, he was able to completely understand him, enabling him to use his element. You are exceptionally talented in handling the metal element. The high-rank metal element has become LV4 and magic has increased by 60. So it starts off at high-rank level 4, huh? Maybe Arama's was at this level too. Though his body was tough, he wasn't very good at handling an element. If Arama's steelworker's friends hadn't come down and forced him to concentrate entirely on acting, then this wouldn't have happened. It was such a relief that Arama's steelworker had wielded the metal element. If Arama's steelworker had possessed an innate element, then even Li Shin Woo wouldn't have been able to replicate it so easily. Several coincidences had coincided, creating a miracle, and that miracle caused Li Shin Woo to advance even further. It was truly a feat befitting a joker. Huop. It's a good thing, he thought, and used his newly learned metal element to form a sphere and throw it. He increased his arm's physical strength to an abnormal level through the manetization skill, causing the sphere to rush towards Sigald. Kook. Sigald had sensed the distant projectile and tried evading it by erasing his entire presence, but he was facing off against none other than the Archmage, Theotane von Selden. The Archmage immediately froze the space around Sigald, so Sigald was unable to fully erase his presence. Ultimately, Sigald had lost his arm from the shoulder down. Li Shin Woo inwardly tightened his fist and yelled, "Strike." It was a perfect surprise attack, a perfect combination attack, and a perfect. It was a perfect dead ball, Shin Woo. I came for revenge, Sigald. Li Shin Woo, like always, ignored Jin's retort and yelled boomingly. Sigald had belatedly freed himself from the time prison and retreated. He gripped his long sword with his still good hand and looked down at him. If looks could kill, then Li Shin Woo would have been torn in half by now. Arama steelworker, after all that, you still didn't die. My body, which you so lovingly broke apart, still throbs. This isn't nearly enough, Sigald. I won't let you die quickly. I'll break your arms and legs and then kill you slowly. Sigald was genuinely angry. He'd lost everything in Byron, so that's why he could speak with such hatred. Hearing Arema's retort, Sigald realized that he'd made a mistake in Byron. If he'd finished off Arema in Byron, then he wouldn't be in this situation where the surface had sent reinforcements. And who is this? Aren't you Arema Steelworker? Several monsters were fighting off Anti-Skull, and the Archmage, Feotane von Seldin, who was holding his own against Sigald, recognized Li Shin Woo as well. To be exact, he recognized Arema Steelworker. Li Shin Woo yelled in a booming voice once more. Lich, I have a lot I want to say to you, but let me tell you just one thing. Let's work together. Work together? You want me to work together with you, someone who rebelled against His Majesty, to fight against this dirty flame-wielding bastard? Yeah, Li Shin Woo firmly nodded his head and continued. We can settle things once he's dead. It'd be easier for you to fight against me than Sigald, no? Ha, how entertaining. You led those dirty vampires here, yet you want me to bury my head in the sand. I know you have an ulterior motive. The Lich smiled wickedly and swung his staff. At that moment, a massive buff was applied to the vampires. Like it? Fine, you rust bucket. Let's work together. Archmage, you fool, you're abandoning me, who has His Majesty's best interests in mind, to join forces with the surface. What the hell is wrong with you? Sigald von Rededane, you fool. The Archmage's staff was clad in darkness once more. Try again once His Majesty forgets about that beam of light you shot at us. So that's what they thought had happened. This was great. Yeah, now that he thought about it, the Archmage had retreated early on, so he didn't know who had shot the cannon. He mistakenly assumed that Anti-Skull was the one that had fired the cannon. Didn't I tell you that it wasn't me? Sigald, you bastard. How dare you lie in front of me, Arema Steelworker? Those that heed the Emperor's command, all forces, charge. Bury those lowly skeletons so that they can never look up at the sky. Li Shin Woo charged, and the Light General followed him, leading the rest of the vampires. This was a battle that would decide the very fate of the capital, yet the heroes weren't even involved. Because of the giant artifact that had once lain in Byron, the heaven-rending cannon. No, now the heaven-defying flag-bearer, all of the capital's defenses were destroyed, and all those level 5 or lower were killed by the light blast right then and there. It was the capital, so it was only right that normal level 1 or 2 citizens had resided there, but now, there was absolutely no trace of them. And thus, the capital had received a blessing of light and had become a true city of death. The blast of light had substantially weakened the undead curse as well, and even the Imperial Army, which consisted of level 6s or higher, was weakened. You unleashed that horror upon us, yet you insist that you're fighting for the Emperor? Shut your mouth, you traitor. That dirty light of yours will never shine upon the underground ever again. I already told you, that wasn't me. I wanted to free you from your shackles. I never intended to eliminate everything in the process. I told you to shut your mouth. The Archmage and Emperor were rightfully angry. Even the undead Emperor, who had been content to quietly build his forces, decided to take this chance to wipe out any forces underground beside his own. And to uphold this order, the Lich was prepared to do everything and anything necessary. As Kracia had said, that blast was the signal for the final battle. The moment the heaven-defying flag-bearer was shot, the battle had already started. But it had turned out a bit different from her expectations. Ah, don't you hear the cries of our dearly departed citizens? That light of yours, which severs all links, is like dust, it's still in the air. Sigald DDDD. Kook, that's right, the Emperor had decided to kill Sigald, the one they assumed had shot the light blast at the capital, first, not the heroes who had come here under God's will, or the forces from the surface, or even the spy, Arema Steelworker. Only Sigald, who had formed his own independent force and specialized in light, even after undeath, had the ability to assault the capital. At least, that's what the Lich and the Emperor thought. You fool, you foolish Lich, think about it. You know how much us Rededanes loved and treasured the people. There's no way I'd do something like that. You won't fool me. Even His Majesty is aware that only you are capable of wielding such light. Your sword is blazing with the same light, and you're shooting at me with the very same light. The situation was really in his favor. If Li Shin Woo hadn't experienced converting the accumulated darkness within the cannon into light through Dark Shadow himself, then even he wouldn't be able to believe that he'd performed such a miracle either. Yet, the Lich hadn't noticed the presence of Shin Woo's shining flame, despite taking a direct hit. Therefore, the Lich couldn't sense Shin Woo's light element. And thus, all suspicion was pushed onto Sigald, who had come to Byron for the express purpose of using said cannon. Kook, you've been deluded for so many years. That's why I opposed the undead curse. Can you even hear me? Are you even looking at me? Theotain von Seldin, where did your intellect go? Is it along with that soul of yours? Ha, Sigald, you talk too much, even when your tongue's rotted away. The Archmage was no pushover, but Shin Woo, as Arama, was also supporting him right now. He rode his golem horse, which he didn't have before, and rushed forward. Sigald grit his teeth. This wasn't the same slow-witted Arama. Arama, what did you do? Tell me, what did the heaven-defying general, who used you like a mere underling, do? Don't you think it's strange that he's the only one not here? You're being used as well. It's not too late, I told you to shut that filthy mouth of yours. Shin Woo accumulated as much mana as he could at the end of his fist, and used the very same technique Arama had used against Sigald. The Metal God technique. This technique, which suppressed the opponent's mana, was impossible to block, even with the use of the Annihilation Flame. Moreover, the Lich supported him from behind, using his spatial magic at just the right time. Kook, Sigald was able to protect his last good arm by using a ton of mana, but the cost was great. Though a level 8's mana reserves were high, they weren't infinite. He looked at the sky, as if lamenting his situation, and then grit his teeth and yelled. Theotain, please get a hold of yourself. My head's just fine. You're still talking, Sigald. Kook, Arama, metal and fire mixed together and melted, and when both of them were gone, Sigald was engulfed in the Archmage's spatial magic. Shin Woo moved away preemptively to allow way for Theotain's magic. He then moved back instantaneously and threw his fist. If it hit, it would definitely inflict some damage. Critical hit, Kahawk. It was as though a sharp drill had pierced through his body and soul, ignoring Sigald's authorities, and causing severe pain. Was this the power of the metal element? Was this also a part of an innate element? Sigald felt an unfamiliar fear creep up on him, rather than the pain. Of course, it wasn't Arama's ability, but the skill Shin Woo received as a reward for destroying a part of the capital with the cannon. The special passive skill, Soul Strike. However, there was no way Sigald would know that. Who? Now are you prepared to face me? Arama, was this really Arama? Sigald was astonished as he parried Arama's metal element reinforced strikes. Before, he was a bit weaker. He was a show-off, a spy that came from the surface that relied upon his tough body and his status as one of the 4 heavenly commanders. What's worse, Arama was much weaker just a few days ago when they had last fought. But then how was he attacking with such agility and precision now? Sigald then voiced such doubts. Are you really Arama? Seems like you're the one who needs to get a hold of himself, Sigald. Anti-Skull, you tried to escape the true blessing of death with such a crude method. That's why you've become like this. Normally, the Metal God General and the Archmage had absolutely no affinity. Yet they were cooperating so well now, whether it be their condemnation of him or their attacks. He couldn't get away, due to the never-ending barrage of physical strikes and magical attacks. Even if he dominated the ambient mana and tried to fight back, the combination of the Lich's spatial magic and the metal element's ability to freeze his mana made it difficult to do so. Was it because they were both level 8? They knew exactly how to fight against him. Even he wouldn't be able to last against the 2 heavenly commanders' attacks forever. Push them back, kill all those who seek to spread that filthy curse to the surface. Kuu, the sun's hot. Light General, please hurry and use the dark red solar eclipse. You filthy, lifeless corpses. Moreover, there was a level 8 behind him commanding the vampires and slaughtering Anti-Skull, so Sigald was really feeling the pressure. Now that all their bases had been destroyed, everything would be over once his subordinates died. But ultimately, in the midst of the intense battle, Sigald was just barely able to retreat using his Annihilation Flame. He then looked at the sky and muttered, "We're just in time. It doesn't matter, die." Shin Woo felt like the air was hotter than before, but decided to not worry about that for now. The issue was that Sigald was in a strange stance. In most cases, when an enemy gets into a special position, it means they're trying to do something. It didn't matter what he was trying to do. Shin Woo knew it would be all over if he killed him, so he concentrated all his magic into his fist and struck. Kook, this isn't enough to bring me down. However, Sagald let it hit him. In an instant, part of his lower body disappeared. Although he'd lost an arm and a leg, Sagald kept his balance and moved through the air. His spirit truly befitted that of a heavenly commander. Kahak, if possible, I didn't want to hurt you, but you're lich, so I suppose it doesn't matter. Try and understand. Sagald had taken a direct hit from Shin Woo's attack but had simultaneously mustered up as much fire as he could and burned the lich's body. Even spatial element mana couldn't erase the annihilation flame, and it went exactly as Sagald had wanted, completely burning the lich. Shin Woo furrowed his brow, as he couldn't understand what Sagald was doing. But then, Sagald extracted something from the lich's stomach. So it was here. Kahak, were you aiming for that from the very beginning? I can't control it with my power alone. Do you remember, Archmage? When we were still on good terms, we managed it together. The two pieces of the controller will now become one. Kahak, what rubbish. He didn't know what this controller was for, but he knew he was trying to do something with it. So Shin Woo stopped him with metal element mana and then attempted to kill him. But then, Sagald disappeared. In the process, he had probably lost another piece of his body, but he wasn't dead. And thus, the powerful energy Shin Woo had emitted destroyed the Archmage's body. There was nothing more frustrating than killing one's ally. He really is fast. That's why I told you to practice with me, didn't I? I thought it would be enough to catch him. Shin Woo realized that Sagald had utilized Fire Shadow and immediately used his darkness to try to find and then destroy him. However, he soon opened his eyes wide open. He couldn't find any traces of him. That wasn't possible. He couldn't find him with his mastered darkness element? Even if he'd used his annihilation flame to erase his presence, Shin Woo should have been able to find him. So if that didn't work, then either Sagald had finally died, or he moved somewhere where there isn't even a speck of darkness. Had Sagald mastered the light element? No, there was no way. Shin Woo had done so with the darkness element, but it wasn't as easy as it sounded. At the very least, Sagald's light didn't seem so absolute. Kuok, L light general, M my skin, my eyes. But then, the vampires fighting against Anti-Skull began to scream simultaneously. The light general, having noticed that their skin quickly began to burn, realized one thing and yelled. Urema, look up, no way. He quickly looked up, and the sight caused him to go off character. But he thought they'd left him off the hook considering the circumstances. The artificial sun, which radiated light all across the underground empire, was coming towards them. With Sagald von Rededane smack dab in the middle of it. When the surface's traders, that's how the surfaced referred to the underground denizens, were chased out, they were forced to struggle desperately to survive. As the surface dwellers had exiled them out of fear and envy, there were several talented individuals amongst them. And there were some whose authorities rivaled even gods. This will be our new nation. We'll live here, and survive. Of course, the one with the most talent was Jizahenu, the second prince who inherited the royal family's barrier ability, which was based on the darkness element. Although he hadn't been able to break through the Magic Emperor's barrier, he had managed to expand the space underground, create a barrier that stabilized it and kept it from collapsing, and protected the people. And thus, he had become ruler of the underground empire, the Emperor. Nature can flourish underground as well. The spirits will help us with that. The elementalist leader, who had formed an alliance with Jizahenu, recreated the miracle of Mother Nature over the vast land that Jizahenu had acquired. The earth spirits would either flatten or uplift the land, while the water spirits were gathered to create rivers. Even more water spirits were gathered to create the sea. The fire spirits provided them with much needed heat so that they could survive. And thus, that woman became one of the emperor's consorts. My lord, I will create the sun with my light. One that shines even brighter than the surfaces. If you're in charge of the day, then I'll take care of the night. Let's support this newly formed empire together. The two with the brightest light and the blackest darkness worked together to create the underground empire's sun. The light user would be responsible for sunrise, while its descent would be managed by the darkness user. The sun wouldn't shine upon the empire without either one of them. Thus, they formed a new clan and were responsible for helping the emperor maintain the empire. Until the day of their descent, you wouldn't have known, Urema, as one who's come from above, that my family was responsible for maintaining this sun for several years. And now, I've fused together with it. It was impossible for Sigald to control the artificial sun by himself. That's why he'd sought to transform the capital into Anti-Skull through the heaven-rending cannon, but he'd failed, so he decided to enter the capital directly. He lured the Lich out and then stole the other sun controller from him. Shin Woo and his group had interfered in the middle, which had made this a lot more complicated, but in the end, Sigald had succeeded. With his controller, he drew the sun towards him, and with the Lich's controller, he was able to fuse with it. While they were fighting, Sigald had looked up into the air. That hadn't been him acknowledging his defeat or giving up. He was trying to figure out how much time he needed to buy before he could counterattack. Though Shin Woo was called the heaven-defying general, even he couldn't have predicted this. Sigald had surprised him a second time. Huh? You risked your life to enter the capital for that? You'll soon disappear without a trace, so what's the point? I applaud your bravery, Urema. I know just how much you've changed in such a short period of time. But now, it's over. If your mana was just a tiny bit stronger, then I wouldn't be here right now. You were so close. Sigald, having successfully fused with the artificial sun, acted triumphantly, as if he hadn't been struggling against him before. Shin Woo had disabled at least half of Sigald's body, but it didn't matter. What would he fear, now that he had access to the artificial sun? After all, the most powerful source of light in this world was now in his grasp. I grieve over the loss of Anti-Skull. If they were here, then they would have been happy to see a new world ahead of them. Huh? Are you going to use that sun to turn the undead in the capital into psychos? It's called Anti-Skull. The moment we become able to move forward, despite being undead, is the moment we become perfect existences. A perfect existence which can coexist with both light and darkness. A new species that can challenge God herself. Shin Woo looked up at Sigald. It didn't matter that Sigald hadn't mastered the light element. Right now, he was light itself. In other words, he was fused with an almighty item that bumped his light element to its max. It was an item on the level of his titan. This bastard, his plan really came together. Moreover, he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goal. I really am unlucky. Shin Woo had no choice but to acknowledge him. Sigald had managed to control the super artifact that had shined upon the underground empire for so many years, so he must be feeling invincible. I had my suspicions. I thought it was starting to feel hotter, but I thought it was just because of Sigald's ability. To think it was caused by the artificial sun's descent, he couldn't even imagine it. He thought Sigald's objective was the Lich, but he was wrong. His objective had been to steal the Lich's artifact and take full control over the artificial sun. Each and everything he does surpasses my imagination. He'll probably try to use that thing to turn the undead into Anti-Skull. If missiles don't work, then fire a nuke, huh? Shin Woo looked at the giant sun that shined before him, as well as Sigald, who was completely hidden within the sun, and just muttered in astonishment. Now he understood. There was no way even his darkness would be able to sense him if he was in that thing. Kook, to think even the artifact won't work. That pathetic darkness of yours can't protect you against this light. Give it up. Whereas, the light general stared at the man who'd cowardly brought a nuke with him. No, Sigald, who'd assimilated with the artificial sun, and activated the dark red solar eclipse. She was gritting her teeth, as the artifact had absolutely no effect. Ultimately, the dark red solar eclipse was nothing more than an artifact that used the undead curse. Even if it gathered all of the darkness in the area, it wouldn't be able to block the sun's light, which was further amplified by Sigald. Gwa, why your majesty, kick, kihi. The vampires were unable to withstand the light and burned away, and the light general instinctively foresaw her impending doom. Shin Woo knew that she'd given up. Run away. I can't do that. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to use her much, but she still had a job to do on the surface, so the best choice would be to send her back. She shouldn't die here, but as expected, she didn't obey his orders. Shin Woo wasn't planning on dragging this out and inwardly sighed. He then activated both command and instigate simultaneously and yelled, Sorora von Lilane, I told you to run. Kook. Why, you coward? Are you trying to bear the burden alone again? Lelaine? Surprisingly, Sigald reacted to that name. Lelaine? Ah, I see. You come from a branch family. So they were still alive. Sigald's voice resounded far and wide, revealing a secret that he really didn't care for. As expected, there was a reason she could originally wield the light element. Though that really didn't matter right now. To think I'd have to kill a descendant of a branch family. But I suppose this too is fate. It seems like God has always given us such a cruel fate. The Redidane name has long since been removed from the family register. You traitor, you're just a terrorist attempting to spread the curse all across the world. Don't get so cocky. Sigald's words actually reinvigorated the Light General. She raised both her arms, causing the sun's light to subside ever so slightly. She was really trying to fight that giant light crystal with light mana? He was absolutely gobsmacked. I've long surpassed the Redidanes. I'll make you regret using that light against me. You're talented enough to talk big. I didn't think a level 8 would show up in a branch family. Unfortunately, it seems like you haven't achieved balance yet. Sorora, his wildcard skill wasn't entirely ineffective against Sigald. The artificial sun accumulated mana above their heads, and Shin Woo, sensing danger, rushed over to the Light General with Jin and stood in front of her. Kuu, pure light shot out from the sun. One single property, the ability to annihilate the darkness that made up the undead, had been maximized. Even if she could wield light, it didn't matter. The blast could kill her instantly. He covered her, as if he were embracing her, and then screamed. Gwa, you're enduring it quite well, Urema. Urema. His scream sounded as though the very world was on the verge of collapse. In addition, his outer shell was being melted away by the light. Sigald was satisfied by his newly acquired strength, and the Light General wept as she looked up at Shin Woo from his embrace. Shin Woo gritted his teeth, and then spoke once more. Sorora, I'll be brief, run away. But, her voice was even more anguished than Shin Woo's. However, he opened his eyes wide and then spoke even louder, so that she wouldn't forget his words. I said run away. Aren't you going to get revenge for us both? Kook, but when you get back, make sure you take revenge. Shin Woo opened a gate behind Sorora. He'd obviously created it through the Heaven Door's key, but she didn't need to know that. No one would expect an artifact of its kind to exist, as it could infinitely create portals between the underground and the surface. Most people would think it was a one-time use item. Urema, are you going to leave me again? You should be able to do it with their help. I'll leave it to you. Urema, Arama. Shin Woo softly pushed the screaming Light General back. Her body disappeared within the gate, and soon the gate closed shut. Sigald was shocked at the realization that she was no longer here. That ability. You don't need to know. But there is something I've been wanting to ask you. Shin Woo was speaking so calmly, despite screaming so loudly before. He sighed lengthily as if enjoying Sigald's subtle gaze. Shin Woo had used every means available to him to analyze Sigald's state after he'd fused with the sun and had come to the conclusion that you can't properly use the annihilation flame in that state, can you? Was he surprised by his question? Or was he surprised that his way of speaking had changed? The sun's light abated momentarily. It seemed like he was using the special passive skill, Arrogance, which was used when a strong opponent was sure of their victory, as he obliged him. While the annihilation flame is indeed my specialty, it's not enough to control this giant artifact, which has condensed light energy for hundreds of years. But this is good enough. I can fulfill all my goals with this light. Ah, so that's how it is. I was wondering, so you can only wield light in your current state, huh? Only light. If that's the case, then this battle is already over. Shin Woo, the wielder of max light resistance, shed his golem skin and smiled. The performer's smile lit up blindingly beneath the underground sun. It had been strange from the very beginning. Sigald had taken control of such a tremendous artifact and was now capable of using light at its maximum potential, yet rather than use that light to supplement his annihilation flame, he insisted on using just the light element alone. He thought it wouldn't hurt to ask, and Sigald actually gave him his answer. Well, it made sense. Intermediate, no, even high-rank annihilation flame wouldn't match up to a mastered light element. Well, At least when their opponent wasn't as ridiculous as Shin Woo and possessed maxed light resistance. Well, I guess it does happen in games. The boss changes their type or their attack pattern halfway through the fight, but it usually doesn't make the fight easier. Sigald's only mistake was not assessing the situation properly. He wasn't aware that the unthinkable happened and two heroes who possessed max light resistance stood before him. Then again, Shin Woo would have still been able to win without it. Hey, do you have an arrogance passive too? You're being really condescending right now. What are you going to do if he returns to his original form? Jin, you've been a bit more prickly lately. All the nuisances were gone now. The sun looked down at Shin Woo and Jin, who'd returned to their original forms, and just shook. He was confident that he'd prepared for every possible variable, so why? At this very moment, Sigald von Rededane's head was completely empty. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. I feel bad that Sarah won't get her turn. Sarah? Shin Woo remarked abruptly, and Sigald instinctively replied. Then, a golem that lay a step away from the battlefield awkwardly moved forward. Who? The golem's outer shell was halfway melted, but surprisingly, an undead popped right out. It was none other than the elder Banshee princess, Sarah. I knew you would be able to defeat him without my help, but you were way too disheartened from losing your prey just once. To be honest, I don't think you really needed to prepare all that much. Sarah, Sigald couldn't understand what was going on. Even if he did, there wasn't anything he could do about it. Thus, Sigald stopped thinking altogether. No, that was actually a lie. Even if there was nothing to be gained, he couldn't help but keep thinking. He had so many questions, even though those questions had developed from a small twister into a raging typhoon. Sarah, why, how? Unfortunately, Sarah completely ignored Sigald and just looked at Shin Woo, speaking curtly. I just wanted to watch you end my older brother from close up. You're being so cocky, but you won't lose him a second time, right? If that happens, then I really will look down on you. Sarah, who'd gotten her first breath of fresh air in a few days, stretched her arms and took a deep breath. She narrowed her eyes at Shin Woo, who was acting so conceited right now. Of course, Shin Woo had mostly expected that kind of response from her and just snorted. Don't worry, he won't get away from me this time. He has nowhere to run. Won't get away? Kook. Hearing that, Sigald instinctively gathered his mana, but soon realized what Shin Woo meant. The sun had cast a giant shadow underneath it, and there were a dozen weapons burrowed within those shadows, restricting Sigald's movements. I prepared this to use against your second innate element. Anyone can do this if they master the darkness element. Kook. Shin Woo couldn't find Sigald before, as his shadow had disappeared. But now that he had assimilated with the sun, the world was filled with darkness that could imprison him. Shadow doesn't exist within light, but light always casts a shadow. The brighter the light, the greater the shadow, just like you right now. It had been difficult for Shin Woo to track Sigald due to his small size and his incredible speed. He'd given up his greatest assets for a slow and giant body, so there's no way Shin Woo wouldn't take advantage of that, would he? Heaven-defying general. How was he able to imitate a Rama steelworker so perfectly? Why was his little sister working with him, despite becoming an undead? No. Where did it all go wrong? Where did he go wrong with his calculations or his plan? What face lay behind his mask? Was he even really undead? What was he thinking? He couldn't figure out his motives, and he couldn't guess them either. Just a little while ago, he had been speaking to the Light General as a Rama steelworker himself. How exactly did he do that? Heaven-defying general, shut it. Shin Woo drew one of the 12 swords restraining the sun. The shining bone sword. Once he gripped the sword, it became larger, longer, and sharper, resembling a claymore. The pressure exerted from the blade was stifling. He was using the rule of bone and mana bone skills too. In addition, he used manatization to reinforce the weapon. The manatization skill could be used on weapons created through the bone armory, as they were classified as his bones. Did you get even stronger in that short period of time? Nope. I didn't think I'd lose you, so I didn't go at my full strength last time. You did the same, didn't you? I'm reflecting on it. You see, once I gained the wild card skill, I mistakenly thought that I always had full control of the situation. But you smashed through those delusions of mine, making me train even harder. Thanks for that, by the way. Shin Woo replied genuinely and simultaneously kicked off the ground. The blinding light descended upon him, but it didn't have any effect on the two heroes, as they possessed max light resistance. And thus, they soared through the air, as if they were a lightning bolt. Kahawk. And so, Shin Woo stabbed his claymore into the giant center of the sun, where Sigald was located. Rotten white blood spilled from Sigald's body. It shined for but an instant before it was evaporated by the intense heat. Shin Woo kept his eyes fixed on Sigald and said, "Sarah, if you have any last words, then now's the time." "I have nothing to say." Sarah, it was exactly as she said. She didn't get in his way and didn't speak excessively. She just silently watched their battle. There were still some parts of her that weren't all that reliable, but he was sure that she had indeed been reborn as a new person. "All right, then, Guak." The Shining Bone Sword's ability, Death God's Fury, which severed all spatial and magical interferences and cut the opponent without fail, was so overpowered that it overshadowed its other skill, but it did actually have another special passive skill. The special passive skill, the Death God's Smile. While wielding the Shining Bone Sword, if the user is attacked or attacks, there is a high chance that the Shining Bone Sword will duplicate and automatically attack his foe. That skill had activated. There was an extra sword piercing through Sigald's body. And another. The claymores continued to multiply, causing the sun to eventually resemble a porcupine. Heaven-defying General Kua. But then, Sigald's pain and hatred doubled, burning the swords away. Had he undergone some sort of unattainable awakening in the midst of that awful pain? Surprisingly, the artificial sun's light began to mix with his flames. And those flames even became transparent. That's right, when faced with his own death, Sigald had become able to supplement the sun's light with his annihilation flame. If he was able to freely use both the sun's light and his annihilation flame, then there would be no one left to stop him. Whether it be the Archmage or the Emperor himself. The intermediate dark shadow element has become LV3 and magic has increased by 40. The beginner shining flame element has become LV7 and magic has increased by 10. The intermediate dark flame element has become LV7 and magic has increased by 20. But that wouldn't stop Shin Woo. How? As I said, you're way too big. Sigald attempted to hide any traces of his existence within the sun's annihilation flame, but with Shin Woo's dark shadow, he was able to tie him down to his darkness and make his presence even clearer. The sun, which had once been so bright, now had a hideous dark spot on it. There's no escape. At the same time, he used his shining and dark flames to devour any of the flames he couldn't reverse. A part of those flames became Shin Woo's strength, and this time it was Sigald who was burnt. "I won't lose you this time." The sun's annihilation flame disappeared. The Shining Bone Sword multiplied again and again, piercing the artificial sun repeatedly. At this point, it was difficult to make out Sigald's original body. Since wild cards already activated, the swords lodged within the sun's shadow simultaneously rose upwards. He didn't need to restrain it anymore. Once he'd countered the annihilation flame, this entire area became Shin Woo's domain. You're not the only one who came prepared. Though the artificial sun had descended so far down, such that it could almost reach the floor, only darkness could be seen around it. While they fought, Jin, Shin Woo, and Sarah quietly but quickly dominated the mana little by little, making this area their domain. At this very moment, the ownership of this domain had been transferred to Shin Woo entirely. So I always wanted to say that. The dozen shining bone swords, which rose from the darkness, were instantly suffused with a huge amount of magic. Sigald already knew what was coming, so he desperately tried using his annihilation flame to avoid it, but it didn't work. But what if he were to use Fire Shadow instead? If he tried that, it would just mix with Shin Woo's darkness and disappear. If I die, who will avenge our citizens? There's no need. No one wants a psychopath who's willing to damn the entire world just for some paltry revenge. Sarah said sarcastically, and Shin Woo took a short deep breath. He asked himself if he missed anything, but he didn't. This battle truly befitted his status as a joker. Shin Woo was satisfied with his performance. If you kill me, then the sun will never shine upon the Empire ever again. That's okay. The shining bone swords emitted darkness simultaneously. Their slashes were absolute, their trajectory unforeseeable. And dozens of these slashes mutilated the artificial sun. Not even a speck of light or fire was left behind. It was completely gone, since the underground doesn't need a sun anymore. Sigald had died. There was no annihilation flame, nor a sword god left. The first and last anti-skull was gone. It was momentarily silent. The battle was over once the fire and light was completely extinguished and darkness reigned. You have hunted a member of the 12 generals, the LV8 Annihilation Flame Sword God Sigald von Rededane. All contributing heroes receive 50 million perium and all stats are increased by 100. You have acquired 15 permits to God's secret shop. Proficiency in all combat-related skills has increased significantly. You have received God's grace. The Invisible Heart skill's maximum level has increased by 15. The Wild Card skill has become LV5 and all stats have increased by 30. You have acquired the title, He Who Brings Down the Sun. All stats have increased by 30. The high-rank light and fire elements have become LV7 and LV8 respectively, and magic has increased by 40. The Manatization skill has become LV6, and health and magic have increased by 20. You feel as though you can take your skills in a completely different direction through Manatization. All of your innate skills have responded, and are attempting to change. The Soul-Seeing Eye skill has become LV6 and all stats have increased by 20. Each and every line caused his heart to pound. His Invisible Heart skill had finally surpassed 200 max lives, yet there was no change. On the other hand, he defeated the artificial sun, yet had gotten such a bombastic name in return. He thought the stat bonuses would be pretty good, or something like that, but there was something more important than all that. That he had somehow won. Who? I barely got him. Oh, it wasn't easy? He sighed forcefully and muttered. Jin, who'd supported him through the battle, tilted her head and asked. Shin Woo just replied curtly. No matter how perfect the stage or the script is, there's no guarantee that the play will be a success until the curtains close. I guess that's true, and I was actually kind of worried at the end when the sun began emitting annihilation flame. I was lucky that his awakening had just begun since I could take care of it with my elements, but if I had made a single mistake while bluffing, then that bastard would have beaten me. I had no idea that you were engaged in such intense psychological warfare. That's just how perfect Shin Woo's acting had been. Of course, he'd gone a step further by appearing as a Rama steelworker and then returning to his heaven-defying general form, confusing Sigald in the process. What's worse, Sarah had popped out of a golem, causing his entire thought process to come to a grinding halt. Thus, he was able to push Sigald into a corner. Bluffing was necessary in a battle to the death. Showing what you don't have, but not showing what you do have. Although Sigald's annihilation flame was perfectly suited for this task, he was still pushed back by Shin Woo. That was the cause of his defeat. I thought he lost for a completely different reason, so I'm absolutely speechless. You two, could you please be quiet? The two, somewhat lethargic due to the pleasure and exhaustion from the battle, were scolded by Sarah. I would appreciate it if you gave me some time to pray. Sarah, who'd inflicted significant mental damage to Sigald, clasped her hands before the wreckage of the artificial sun and closed her eyes. There were teardrops at the edges of her eyes, befitting a true banshee. To think she'd treat him like family now of all times. Shin Woo, who was absolutely flabbergasted, just snorted. Weren't you the one that asked me to kill him ASAP? Yes, I did. I still consider him my older brother, when he's not intending to kill me or this world. To him, that meant that, the only good Sigald was a dead Sigald, but he didn't tell her that. Sarah seemed to feel a sense of shame, as she didn't pray for very long. Seeing that, Shin Woo was about to go off to collect the loot. However, Sarah quietly said, if my older brother had met you under different circumstances, would he have been alive right now like me? Would you have not had to kill him? Nope. There was no hope for him when his vengeance was targeted at not the Magic Emperor and his forces, but humanity as a whole. I see. Thank you. That makes me feel a little better. He could hear the bitterness in her voice, yet her expression seemed more peaceful than before. Perhaps that was a question she was asking herself, not Shin Woo. After becoming a hero, she had resolved to kill her older brother herself. She hadn't thought that she was in the right. The fact that she even had to ask Shin Woo was. No, There was no point in thinking about this anymore. Sigald was dead now, the end. Good work. I wasn't helpful at all. I just watched on the sidelines. But I'll do my best for the remainder of the battle. Of course you will. You have to earn your keep. Shin Woo scolded Sarah and stretched his hand towards the wreckage. Then, he was flooded with a string of messages. Lucky strike. You have acquired 899,550,410 perium. The Lucky Strike skill has become LV7. You have acquired the LV9 Light-Tinged Annihilation Flame Sword God's Frontal Bone. You have acquired the LV8 Annihilation Flame Sword God, Sigald von Rededane's Fingerbone. You have acquired the LV9 Annihilation Flame Tinged Artificial Sun. Through bone reinforcement, it has been changed into the LV9 Annihilation Flamebone Core. Originally, Sigald would have dropped all of his equipment and artifacts as well, but by fusing with the Artificial Sun, all of said equipment had been destroyed. However, Shin Woo was content with this, since he not only received 2 of Sigald's bones but also received the Artificial Sun's core. This is the sun that shone upon the Underground Empire. It's very different, but yeah. Sigald's influence had caused it to change once, and Shin Woo had caused it to change a second time, resulting in the Annihilation Flame Bone Core artifact. The inside of the small bone core was illuminated by a transparent light, and its exterior was an unusual shape. However, the amount of flames it contained within were immeasurable, and it was hard for him, who possessed LV8 high-rank fire and LV7 high-rank light, to even hold it. Seeing that, Jin knew exactly what Shin Woo was thinking. You want to use that on the Titan, don't you? Of course I do. Kracia and I managed to cover the Titan's weaknesses, so I thought the Titan core was perfect. But now that I think about it, there's something above perfection, isn't there? Ah, I see. If that's what you think, then I suppose it's true. In your original world, that is. First, Shin Woo very carefully stored the Annihilation Flamebone core into his inventory. Then, he collected the 9 million perium from the opponent that gave him the most grief and gripped the level 8 and 9 bones in both hands. So this is purely Sigald's, and this one's been affected by the Artificial Sun. A bone sommelier? Want one? I'll pass. I think level 8's enough for me. Shin Woo wasn't being honest with her. He just wanted to see her reaction, as she hated bone reinforcement. He grinned and absorbed the level 8 finger bone first. At that moment, Shin Woo was afflicted with sharp pain. This would always happen whenever he absorbed a high-level existence's bone, but the bone of one who'd trained for so many years was very different. Absorbing the LV8 Annihilation Flame Sword God, Sigald von Rededane's fingerbone through bone reinforcement. Strength has increased by 60 and agility by 70. The high-rank light element has become LV8 and magic has increased by 20. High-rank fire resistance has become LV8 and magic has increased by 60. The high-rank combat sense skill has become LV10, allowing you to see a glimpse of the realm beyond. The skill is now maxed and will have both a direct and indirect effect on your skills. Agility has increased by 140. You have learned the fusion element, beginner fire shadow LV5. Magic has increased by 50. I'm the only one who can right His Majesty's wrongs. I will return the Empire to the surface no matter what. Sigald von Rededane. He had a level 9 bone waiting, so his expectations hadn't been high, but surprisingly, the bone had an abundance of power and memories within. Sure, Shin Woo was happy about his light element and his fire resistance leveling up, but he was most happy about his maxed out combat sense. Logically speaking, Sigald had far outstripped Shin Woo in terms of basic combat abilities. By absorbing Sigald's bone, Shin Woo had inherited his combat abilities. Thus, his combat sense had risen to high rank LV10, maxing it out. And the change he'd undergone wasn't the easiest thing to explain. Of course, it's not like his combat abilities completely transcended Sigald's now, but if he trained enough with these memories and experiences, then he would eventually get to where he wanted to be. It really is way better to steal someone else's abilities than to just train on my own. He thought like a thief and turned his attention to the next skill. It was none other than Fire Shadow. I was probably able to learn it as quickly as I did because of how high my fire and darkness elements are. Had Sigald used Fire Shadow for a long time? No, absolutely not. He specialized in light and fire, so he only gained this ability after becoming undead and acquiring the darkness element. The fact that Sigald had even obtained another innate element just by acquiring the darkness element was unbelievable, but Fire Shadow really wasn't much compared to the Annihilation Flame. It was just that Shin Woo, who'd absorbed the memories and knowledge, specialized in fire and darkness, which allowed him to learn it right off the bat. So what does that element even do? Sigald couldn't even use it properly when he fought against you. This maximizes the darkness element's ability to link people. In a way, it was similar to Lightning Bind. But contrary to Lightning Bind, which allowed the Magic Emperor to control his subordinates from long range, Fire Shadow reflected Sigald's desire to rush over and save his subordinates, wherever they may be. In other words, it focused on protecting his forces, rather than reinforcing them directly. But it seems like Sigald didn't understand this ability fully, even though it was his ability. As evidenced by how he made his subordinates sacrifice themselves or how he only used it as a transportation ability. Shin Woo looked down at the shadow cast by the flame and smiled. That shadow stretched out, touching Jin's and then Sarah's shadow as well. They both flinched simultaneously. Whenever the fire's shadow erupted from the ground, he could feel his connection with them deepen. The beginner fire shadow element has become LV7 and magic has increased by 20. And thus, Shin Woo came to a conclusion. The fire shadow element wasn't a simple transportation skill, it was a wide area buff skill that affected anyone connected to him. Shin Woo tested out the fire shadow element several times and felt as though this element suited him more than Sigald. Fire Shadow would connect him to his subordinates, strengthen them, and protect them. This ability, which would buff his contractees, was similar to the Lightning Bind element, but also completely different. It feels a bit unpleasant. It feels like you're right beside me at all times. I'm testing out the ability, so bear with it. This is strange. It's a buff? It feels like some unknown power is strengthening my every move. My fire-using subordinates will likely experience the most extreme change. While the Magic Emperor's Lightning Bind specialized in controlling his subordinates' power, Fire Shadow was the opposite. It used the user's power to strengthen their subordinates. Lightning Bind forcefully took control of one's body at long range, whereas Fire Shadow allowed the user to transport to their subordinate's side. They were both opposite extremes. The reason Sigald's soldiers were forced to immolate themselves to summon him was all due to his inexperience with it. Sigald's skill in the light element had far outstripped his skill in the darkness element, thus disallowing him from using the fire shadow element properly. This is fun. Plus, it's really useful. It was definitely something I needed. Shin Woo hadn't been able to strengthen his subordinates with the darkness element, so he was overjoyed that he'd gotten an innate element with the ability to do so. Fire Shadow would likely strengthen his darkness as well. To be more specific, he felt as though he would find new possibilities. Like with the overlapping ability. Oh, this works? Shin Woo found that he could only transfer the effects of his skills or elements. With this, Shin Woo could have some fun. But because Jin and Sarah resented him for this, he soon stopped. If you do it again, I'll get mad for real. I'll cry for you. Do you understand what this means? Do you have any idea how much strategic value lays in this ability? Stop. Use it when you need that strategic value. Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry. After he'd gotten familiar with the fire shadow element and raised it to beginner LV8, Shin Woo lifted the next item. It was none other than the level 9 bone. Was it just him, or was there light coming from the bone? He soon realized that it wasn't him seeing things. This bone, which had undergone a deep fusion with the artificial sun, was already part artifact. He took a deep breath and tightly gripped the bone. Then, he activated Bone Reinforcement. Absorbing the LV9 light-tinged Annihilation Flame Sword God's frontal bone through Bone Reinforcement. Strength and agility have increased by 200, health by 100, and magic by 300. The high-rank light and fire elements have become LV10 and have been maxed out. Magic has increased by 480. Shin Woo somewhat knew what to expect, as he'd absorbed the level 9 Garuda's bone before. Yet, he was absolutely gobsmacked. It wasn't just the effect of Sigald's bone. The abilities from the bone fused together with his own, causing him to reach a new level. He had maxed the light and fire elements in one go. It's hot. Shit, it's really hot. He'd been looking forward to this, but the aftereffects of mastering two elements simultaneously were huge. It felt as though the bright light and the hot flames were erupting from his cells and exploding. When he'd mastered the darkness element, all he needed to do was feel and think about the darkness element, but this was different. The various elements asserted their existence within him and went wild. Shin Woo's mind was in a daze. Fortunately, he had a close association with both the fire and light elements. A flame-wielding swordsman appearing within the Redidane family, which had inherited the light element for generations, was no coincidence. Shin Woo studied these two elements in depth and then closed his eyes. High-rank fire resistance has become LV10 and has been maxed out. Magic has increased by 50. Eventually, his fire resistance had been maxed out as well. The element had been maxed out, so it was only natural that the resistance would follow suit. Then, the unpleasantness, which was akin to wearing clothes that didn't fit, disappeared. He felt great, as though he'd just dipped into a warm hot spring. Yeah, I shouldn't overthink it. I shouldn't separate myself from the two elements. Just like how I can become darkness and the other way around, I can become fire and light as well. When he'd mastered the darkness element, Shin Woo had transformed his entire body into darkness. Like that time, he transformed his body into fire and light, filling the entire area with the two elements. When he became one with the darkness, he had collected it at a single point. But it was different with the fire and light elements. He switched between expanding and contracting them, as well as heating them and cooling them. Surprisingly, his manetization skill, which had leveled up not too long ago, had leveled up once again. The manetization skill has become LV7, and health and magic have increased by 20. You have reached the peak of light and darkness. You have satisfied the conditions required to fuse the two elements together. You have acquired the title, Chaos Spawn. All stats have increased by 30. The power of all your elements increases by 10%. Ultimately, the light and fire completely disappeared and nothing remained. Then, Shin Woo appeared from within the void and landed on the ground. The darkness element is strengthened when the light element is maxed out. It was a natural phenomenon. Contrary to others, who geared more to one side or the other, Shin Woo had chosen the right path. Have you become a god? You'd become like this too if you max an element. Isn't that what a god is? At first, that's what I thought too. But I found that gods aren't pushovers. I have no idea how they all become gods so easily. Sarah asked and Shin Woo teasingly replied. Then, he caught his breath. He knew that it wasn't over yet. He'd won big, of course, but he had yet to receive Segald's greatest ability. You have acquired the fusion element, Intermediate Annihilation Flame LV1. Magic has increased by 100. It was the Annihilation Flame, which was both a fusion and innate element, and was created by combining the essence of both the fire and light elements. Because he had mastered both the light and fire elements, the Annihilation Flame started off at the intermediate level, despite it being Segald's innate element. Though there was still the matter of it being capped at intermediate level 10. They're fundamentally similar, but it's also completely different from Shining Flame. Shining Flame was used to vaporize anything and everything. On the other hand, the Annihilation Flame was collected inside one's body and burned oneself. But that didn't mean that it would vaporize the user. The burnt body and soul wouldn't be destroyed, and something else would be substituted in their place. And thus, the user would appear in a completely different state, unbeknownst to their opponent. That's why he felt as though Segald's Annihilation Flame was greater than the Garuda's Shining Flame. And that's why I had such a hard time dealing with him, but it ultimately became my power. It was a complicated ability, so he would need to practice with it to use it to its full effect, but Shin Woo was quite talented himself. When he fought against Segald, he'd gotten a good grasp on how the Annihilation Flame worked, so if he just practiced it a little bit more, then he could truly make it his own. Your magic stat is over 10,000. You have acquired the title, He Who Begins to Resemble Mana. Magic has increased by 100. Your body is saturated with a higher quantity and more powerful mana. The manetization skill grows more quickly than before. Shin Woo felt relieved, as he thought his body was finished with all the changes. However, another unexpected happened. He'd gotten a title for passing the 1,000 magic mark before, but apparently, there was a version of it for passing the 10,000 mark too. Shin Woo really had no way of knowing that this existed beforehand. Regardless of Kraish's genius, or Jin's child of light, their stats were nowhere near close to 10,000. As expected, monetization and this title's goal align. Honestly, he was really lucky. His priority was the monetization skill, yet by passing the 10,000 magic mark, his body had been transformed to be more suitable for the skill. His stats, which had originally been balanced, were completely all over the place, but it didn't really matter. Once the Joker mastered the monetization skill, their pre-existing body wouldn't matter. A single battle caused you to change so much. Is this man always like this? That's not the first time someone's asked me that. Normally, one needs time to digest what has happened and will grow from it slowly, but he grew so much all at once. That's why Shin Woo got so strong in such a short period of time. Is there really any other reason besides that? He truly is loved by God. So is that the recent trend? If God loves you, she turns you into a skeleton, is what she wanted to say, but Jin remembered everything Lee Shin Woo had done thus far and just kept her mouth shut. It really did feel like Lee Shin Woo was loved by God. Whereas, Lee Shin Woo had no idea what they were talking about and was drawing out the remaining essence from Sigald's bone. It consisted of memories of Sigald and the Archmage creating the artificial sun together, and even then, Sigald was already level 8. This sun will continually shine upon the Empire, and no one will be able to drop it from the sky. One day, when we return to the surface, this sun will become unnecessary. When that time comes, I will come and collect it. Sigald von Rededane. How ironic. Before he died, Sigald had said that, if he died, then the sun will never shine upon the Empire ever again. Sigald had stated that he'd collect the sun once they returned to the surface. Did he keep his promise, since he assimilated with the sun, or should he say that he was indeed an undead, as he had forgotten his promise? Well, anyway, it'll turn out exactly as you said, Sigald. There was no longer a need for the sun underground, as there would soon be a victor. By retrieving his light, Lee Shin Woo felt the Empire fill with darkness and took a deep breath. With this, the Empire's darkness would become even stronger, and anyone who had relied on the artificial sun would lose their way. The end was near. Neither side would back off now. The unavoidable final battle was approaching. Shall we make a break for it? All right. Lee Shin Woo checked his mana radar and confirmed that the Sun Spear General, who stayed back to stop Leofield von Terriman, was dead. He then checked that the remaining golems had accomplished their mission of collecting the bone he left behind, nodded his head, and opened a gate. His party soon disappeared from the capital. Though the underground capital, which had lost all traces of light, had regained its silence, that silence would certainly not last for very long.